So this is a presentation that I created for my parents and for some of the teachers at the preschool that I taught at for 2 years. So this presentation is how literacy is represented in the pre-K classroom and how we foster literacy learning in the Reggio and an inquiry-based context. So I modeled this presentation off of a book written by Peter Johnson called Opening Minds, and he talks a lot about the inquiry-based approach to learning and to teaching. And one thing that he talks about is the dynamic learning beliefs versus fixed performance beliefs. So I kind of talked about which do we practice in our classroom. So in a dynamic view, the dynamic view really sees the process as an imperative and is utmost importance. So how the children do things is the most important, the process behind it. And then from a fixed view, the process is of little importance and consequence. It's more about the outcome, how the child performed, the speed, and the number of errors that draw the most attention. So in our school, we practiced a dynamic view of learning. Here you can see there's they give examples of the two different types of belief systems. It's pretty small, but I have a little link to the book at the end of the page where you can look at them. Oh, there we go. So dynamic learning, the more you learn, the smarter you get, and you can change your mind, your smartness, and who you become. I'll just read a few of them. The goal is to learn as much as you can. Problems, challenges, errors are to be expected if a person is taking on a challenge, and that's something that's valued, and that's something we valued a lot in our school. And then collaboration is important, and success requires it, along with interest and efforts to comprehend. Seeking help is sensible after exhausting one's own resources. So really here you can see that a dynamic learning frame is very important and emphasizes the learning process rather than outcomes. It really plays into critical thinking skills and problem solving skills. And here the fixed performance, you can see those beliefs are that people have fixed traits such as smartness, intelligence, and personality, and that those things can't change. The goal is to look as smart as you can. Challenge is usually seen as risky and stressful rather than engaging and exciting and interesting. So those are just two of kind of the main belief systems, and you can see the difference between the two. And the school really was practicing dynamic learning, and you can see that Common Core nowadays is trying to go more towards the dynamic learning frame. So the importance of context in my classroom. One of the questions was, how can we apply children's literacy learning to real and meaningful life experiences instead of just sitting the children down in pre-K and having them memorize letters and numbers. With this being a Reggio-inspired school, that's a big no-no. So I had to think outside the box about how we could incorporate literacy into our everyday curriculum, with it still being inquiry-based and not direct instruction. And also in preschool, there are developmental milestones that every child has, and those things have to be taken into consideration, as well as the regular instruction that was going on in the classroom. So we needed to find a healthy balance between those two. So one of the ways that we applied literacy to the everyday instruction was by asking open-ended questions, listening to the children's voices and to the stories that they were bringing in from home, and from their everyday lives outside the school community. And then being an active observer. What are they interested in and what more can they learn? That was a really big one. Following their interests and then using their interests to teach them these concrete skills, literacy skills. And overall, this usually would help build their trust and acceptance. So daily practices, we would, at the beginning of the year, we always had a daily sign-in sheet. This really got them practicing their letters in their names, but also to see that other children in our classroom had letters that represented their names. So they already started to have an idea of the alphabetic principle through this daily sign-in routine. And it was remarkable to see their progression from the first day of school to the last day of school with their penmanship and just recognition of upper and lowercase letters. Here, all of our inquiry lessons, we would also incorporate literacy into those. We hatched some praying mantises in our classroom as a part of a metamorphosis experiment to see what that process was. And when we first got the mantises, there was hundreds of them that hatched, and by the end we only had one, probably about a month and a half later by the time we released a lot of them. And unfortunately some of them ate each other, but by the end we ended up with one, and we decided to keep him as a pet, or her as a pet. So here you can see we took a vote on what we should name our praying mantis, and we narrowed it down to two names, Snowy and Raina. You can see here everyone wrote their name. So there's another simple way to incorporate their writing into the daily inquiry explorations. Here was another one. We planted beans. A lot of voting and democracy, letting them know that they have a choice and that they can have their own choice. But again, writing their names. Here you can see. And we created agreements at the beginning of the school year. We asked the children how we wanted to be together for the entire year. What does that mean to be a community? And then they all made agreements and drew illustrations to go along with their ideas for what community means. And then they signed a contract, essentially. And this was the very beginning of the year. You can see their letters. A lot of their names are going vertically instead of horizontally, all over the place. This was towards the end of the year. You can see that was towards the end. No, that might have been the middle. But you can see that progression, the end of the year. There's the beginning. So the context for literacy in this sense is being an active participator in the classroom, which creates stronger classroom culture. Visualizing names of a lot of the children around them, of their peers, they can see that there's a lot of people that make up a group or a community. And that it also, literacy can foster democracy, so understanding that everyone has a voice and opinion in terms of using the voting sheets, and that it might be different from their own. So we really tried to tie in the literacy component with inquiry-based learning in early childhood education. So story workshop was something that we started at the beginning of the school year all the way until the end. It started with simple questions, and then I would have the children dictate a response to me to tell a story about that revolved around that question. And eventually it led to them writing their own stories. So the purpose of it was to inspire creative storytelling, introduce components of stories through their own work, beginning, middle, end. What kind of characters are there? Are there always problems in stories? Connecting ideas to illustrations, building confidence, and learning to navigate through the sequence of events in story writing. So these children were really learning complex literacy concepts at a really young age, but they're embedded, of course, in inquiry-based learning. So a lot of them really, they did it through creativity and weren't being forced to write a story or to think about, well, what's the sequence of events? It was out of their own interest, and they wanted to do it. Here's one of the stories. What story can you tell about your family? This was the beginning of the year. Very simple. My mom, my dad, me, and my mom have our swimsuits on, and we are going to the pool. Eventually, they started to develop more, and they were a lot more detailed. What story does the color blue tell? My mom is trying on a dress with shoes. My dad is thinking about my mom. They will go to the beach with me. So incorporating again colors, but with also in the sense of literacy. Here's another story about what the color blue tells. I was going to a blue rocket ship to go to the blue planets. The rocket ship broke, but it was able to still fly. We went home after that. And then we moved on to them writing their own stories. This was the very end of the year. We would help them with sounding out letters, and then they would begin to write the stories on their own. A lot of them were able to spell very well. A lot of them copied stories from books, still at the very early stages of spelling. But we used a canvas like this one to inspire their writing. So a lot of them would draw their pictures and characters first to think about details and what would actually happen in their story. So we also transformed our block area to make it more connected to literacy development and language arts. So we created reading and writing, or we used reading and writing in this area by creating signs for each of the blocks. They labeled them. So by having environmental print around the classroom with those labels was very beneficial. They labeled them themselves. There was directions in the area. Each area, we had a character designing area for story building, so they labeled that area. And then also they would create plans for how they would design buildings, so writing their plans out on those papers. Sometimes those plans were just marked with, a simple letter to represent what they wanted. And then they would tell stories about the things that they built in this area, or the stories that they created with the blocks. Here's a story. You can see a sign that he created with the blocks. These boys had created a huge structure over here, and they were placing the sentences together. I cut them in half, and we worked together to sequence them so that they wanted to say, "Please do not knock down." This gave them an idea. This kind of played into the literacy element of sentence awareness or word awareness, and knowing that those words were all individual. And there you can see her writing, using her literacy knowledge to write out the shape name. And she's writing out a shape name also. And there you can see the story building going on with the different signs. And here's the character designing area where they would design characters for their stories. So incorporating literacy into project work, we did a whole unit on ecosystems and exploratory projects. We explored ecosystems, and all of the children chose their own organism to research and to find out what it actually needed, what that organism needed to survive. So each student created their own ecosystem project, and then they wrote down what they thought it needed, and then did research and modified whatever they thought, if it was wrong or right. But here you can see writing out the words, so connecting literacy to these types of projects as well. This is our little ecosystem that started it was our initial provocation for this unit. And here one girl, Amelie, wrote out the things that our baby shrimp, which were in this ecosystem, needed to survive, and that we shouldn't touch it. And then she drew a concept drawing of what it looked like. Here is, again, connecting literacy to this project, what it needs, writing out each word. Lukey was very advanced, as you can see. There are some more examples. And then we used wire and beads to explore sorting and also colors. So they wrote each of the colors on the bags where these beads went. So again, connecting literacy here to math and patterns. And then connecting literacy to nature. Here's our praying mantis exploration. This is when we released them all. The children created signs for the other children in the school so that no one would go into the area where we released them, to keep them safe. And here's their stories about the praying mantises. Once we released them, the children created stories about what they thought would happen to them. Here they were giving each other piggyback rides in the garden. This one, I think she said that they got married. There's the female and the male. And then they were having a wrestling match. I think Kellen said that. And they wrestled each other. So their amazing stories, their creativity that came out of this was just amazing. But again, connecting science to literacy. This is the cage where our praying mantis lived, and one of the students created a ruler's chair because that praying mantis had survived all of the others. And that's kind of a quick snapshot of how of different ways that I connected literacy in the classroom to projects that were going on year-round. Simple things, but that were so important to them developing beginning literacy skills, and that will help them be successful going into kindergarten. And that's all. Thank you.